Alrighty. $194. 194 is an even number. The Federal Police emergency number in Brazil is 194. Will and Grace, the epic TV show, has 194 episodes. This guy is the 194th richest person in the world. Titanic, the great movie, is 194 minutes long. Talk, the new Global Health short course for Monash University students from the Faculty of Medicine, Nursing and Health Sciences, has just signed up 194 students. I think that's something worth talking about. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Green Road. My name's Ramvi, and I'm lucky enough to kick things off with a quick intro into talk. But before I go any further, this event is being held on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and the elders from other communities who may be here today. All right, so we'll start off with what is talk. Most of you should know that talk is the new Global Health short course on the scene, but what I want to share with you today is why. I want to share with you the story behind why we're doing this. All right. So previously, we'd come along to an event like this, something pretty much exactly like this, and if it was decent, you'd leave informed, or your perspective may have been broadened, and you may have even been inspired or enthused to get involved, to just do something. But then you go home. I remember when I was in first year, I used to walk all the way down through halls, and you walk home and you remember that there's a lecture tomorrow morning, that you've got ward rounds at 8, that there's tutes you've got to catch up on, that there's assignments to write, and textbooks to read, something to check up on Moodle, and your weekend, well, that's already booked out with your social life, or sport, or music commitments, or just something, and life's busy. So you may leave an event like this with something like those emotions or thoughts, but then we just go back to the grind of life. So we understand that it's really, really hard to take the next step. So with a bit of research and a bit of data, what we've come up with is what we think is the missing step, and that is talking. So this short course aims to serve as a platform to not only give you the information, but then kind of inspire you to get talking, to take the next step. But don't get me wrong, the point of talk isn't to get you all to quit med or whatever degree you're doing and to become a global health professional or expert. That's not the point of this. The point of talk is to prepare future health professionals to move beyond the individual's health and the individual's biopsychosocial model and really consider the realistic and the pragmatic context of which we treat patients. All right, so there's some really good literature on this, and so if you're interested, give me a yell. But I'm going to wrap it up and hand it over with two little things. Firstly, I'd like to publicly thank our amazing talk team. So this is a group of individuals who took a leap into the unknown, really the unknown, and were willing to give it a go and have worked their butts off to pull this together. So thanks, guys. You guys are awesome. And number two, we're not that naive. We understand that talk is dreaming pretty big, to create these future health professionals, blah, blah, blah. We're dreaming big, and inevitably, in its first year, we're probably going to fall short. But the point is that this thing is now established. We've got 194 students here on the first go. And the only thing, from year to year and module to module, it's going to continuously improve and form into something that none of us could imagine at this moment. But the catalyst for this change and this growth has got to be you guys. The catalyst for this growth has to be your feedback and your input that you give us about what works and what doesn't work. So we want to hear it, and we'll take it on board, and that's what's going to shape talk in the years to come. All right. So, congratulations to the inaugural cohort of talk. You're all now the first talkers of 2013. We know there was a bit of a bumpy start, but we think you'll like what we've got lined up. And to you non-talkers in the audience, I'm sorry to blab on about this, but I hope that we've caught your attention and maybe if you have any ideas or thoughts, come have a chat with me. All right, so I'm going to leave it at that. I'd now like to introduce to you two incredible women, your conveners for the Climate Change and Health module. Please welcome Claire Felmingham and Raima Ahmed.
Hi guys, thanks very much for being here tonight. It looks like a very promising night and we're all very excited. And to start off with, we've got someone very special.
Yep, so our first speaker is Dr. Maren Redenbach from the Royal Children's Hospital, and she's going to be talking about the effects of climate change on children's health, specifically the effects of coal usage. So everyone please put your hands together to welcome Dr. Redenbach.
Thank you very much, Claire and Raima, and congratulations to everyone on organising tonight, because this is just absolutely phenomenal, and the Green Road is incredibly exciting. I thought I'd mention, Ravi said that this is dreaming very big, the Green Road, and the program, the talk program. But when I was in medical school, I had a lot of fantastic friends who were also part of a global health group at Melbourne University. And in the time since we've graduated medical school, those friends have gone off and done some really amazing things. So one of them is now an organiser of MSF. So she works in Paris and is one of the key people in the office there. I've got another friend who's done years and years of placements all around the world with MSF. I've got friends who've worked in remote and regional Aboriginal communities, and really on incredible development programs all around the world. So I know that for the time that you're at med school, it seems like a long time, but you will get out there and you will be doing these amazing things that make a huge difference to the world, and you're going to have really interesting careers. They're going to be really rewarding, and you're going to make a big difference to people's lives. So congratulations on starting on this path. It's really inspiring, and what you're doing is laying the foundation and the groundwork for you to have really fantastic careers in the years to come. So congratulations everyone for coming tonight. My background, I'm a paediatric trainee. I am nearly finished paediatrics, so hopefully if I come back to speak to you all in a year or two, I will have some extra letters after my name. For the moment, I'm a final year advanced trainee. I'm specialising in community child health. But it's taken me a bit of time to actually get through my specialisation, because I've been working half-time and then volunteering half-time for the last 5 years, basically since I realised what a huge impact climate change was going to have on the lives of people in Australia and people all around the world, and that climate change is the greatest global health threat of the 21st century. And for me, I made an assessment of what I was doing. I absolutely love my paediatric work. It's been brilliant, and I still really enjoy that. But I decided I wanted to put half of my time into dealing with issues around climate change. That's actually led me from climate change to looking at what the causes of climate change are and how Australia contributes, and particularly to issues around the use of fossil fuels, mining and export from Australia. And in doing that, I've met a really fabulous bunch of people, also doctors, who are involved as volunteers with an organisation called Doctors for the Environment Australia. And basically we're concerned about the health impacts of climate change, and therefore we work on the causes around fossil fuel use, mining and use. And one of the things, when you actually look at fossil fuel use, obviously it contributes to climate change, but it also contributes to some really terrible local health impacts. And that can help us draw the link between the communities surrounding these developments and the global health issues and implications of climate change. So some of the slides I'm presenting tonight are the kind of things I present when I go out to communities around Australia and talk to them about both the local and the global health impacts of coal. Here are some of the people from Doctors for the Environment Australia. You can see our annual students conference, which has 200 or 300 people a year. It's really a brilliant weekend. We've got some fantastic experts who are involved with Doctors for the Environment. So on our board of scientific advisors, we have Fiona Stanley, Sir Gustav Nossal, Peter Doherty, all Australians of the Year, and two former Nobel Prize laureates. And really great people here in Victoria, public health experts, anaesthetists, GPs, people in paediatrics. The man you can see up there underneath the sign that says Clean Energy for Eternity is an orthopaedic surgeon who works up in New South Wales on the coast there and is really involved in working for clean energy as well as his orthopaedic practice. We publish articles in, this is from the Medical Journal of Australia, and we also do education, both of our colleagues, community members, and of politicians as well. So recently, a number of us presented to a Senate committee on the health impacts of air pollution, and some of what we presented I'll show you here tonight. These are some of the things that I've done, talking at community forums in all across Gippsland. The one at the bottom is some talks that I did in Mackay around the health impacts of coal dust, and I've been working with communities in Bacchus Marsh and in Anglesea who are impacted by coal mining or potentially impacted by proposed coal mines. So to get into things, why should doctors be concerned about coal and why should we be concerned about fossil fuels? Well, every stage in the mining or the use of coal and other fossil fuels has direct impacts on human health. So that includes the mining, the disposing of contaminated water and tailings from the mining process, transportation, washing, combustion, and then the post-combustion waste. And to tie this to the global health perspective, I thought I'd present a couple of recent pieces of work. This was an article published earlier this year in May, really interesting article that looked at the impact of coal burning in northern China. There was a policy in northern China that houses that were situated north of the Huai River were heated, or towns situated north of the Huai River were given coal, basically coal boilers to provide heat. And towns south and people living south weren't provided with that source of heating. And a recent analysis has showed that there's been basically a 5.5-year average decrement in life expectancy of people living north of the river as a result of cardiorespiratory disease, which is linked to the burning of coal. So that's an incredibly significant impact on the lives of people there. It's been estimated from that the effects of long-term exposure to an additional, the units of measurement for total suspended particulates, which are a type of coal air pollution, micrograms per metre cubed, an additional 100 micrograms per metre cubed of TSPs is associated with a reduction in life expectancy of about 3 years. Another figure you might have heard recently is that in Australia, air pollution kills more people every year than car accidents. So this is not an insubstantial problem at all. This is from a recent report by Greenpeace about the health impacts of coal in India. And you can see there that it's estimated that in the year 2011 to 2012, 10,000 children under the age of 5 died as a result of exposure to air pollution associated with coal-fired power stations. And among other things, total premature mortality between 80,000 and 115,000 people. Emergency room visits about 900,000. So this is a really significant issue. In addition to the impacts of air pollution, there are other really significant impacts on communities that are near coal mines. So that includes the compromisation, the fact that fertile agricultural land is impacted upon, and obviously clean food and water are something that are really critical for us globally coming into this century, or moving into this century. Coal mining is a dangerous occupation, and it has been for a long time. We still see terrible coal mining accidents that kill significant numbers of people. And there's actually an increase, particularly in the US, there's an increase in deaths and disease resulting from coal workers' chronic exposure to coal dust. And in addition, there's a community impact of mining. And a really interesting thing that happened recently was that a community in New South Wales called Bolger went to court to try to prevent the expansion of a coal mine in their area, because they said the economic benefits of this coal mine are going to be outweighed by the social impacts. And they actually won that case in the Land and Environment Court about 2 months ago. Unfortunately, both the coal mining company and the New South Wales government is actually appealing that finding. So we'll wait to see what happens when that goes to a higher court. Getting into what the specific impacts are, coal mining, coal production, coal transport creates air pollution, and so that includes dust from the coal itself being shifted as it breaks down. It includes the gases and other pollutants that are released from combustion of coal directly. And some examples of that include sulfur dioxide, which is a respiratory irritant, can provoke asthma attacks and cause worsening of chronic lung disease, and carbon monoxide, which is produced when fossil fuels are burnt in car exhaust. Secondary pollutants are when those primary pollutants undergo reactions in the atmosphere, or reactions. Particularly, one of them, the most important, is the formation of ozone. Ozone's great when it's up in the upper atmosphere and it's protecting us from UV radiation. It's not very good when it's on ground level. When you inhale ozone, it basically causes something very similar to sunburn in the lungs. So it causes, it causes immediate respiratory problems, and that's formed from volatile organic compounds which are released in the burning of coal, combined with sunlight and heat. So communities living around coal-fired power stations are exposed to increased levels of ozone, particularly in summer. It also affects us in cities when we, as a result of car exhaust. In terms of the composition of what's in coal, coal dust and coal pollution, basically anything that's in coal when it's combusted can be released. So obviously the major elements are carbon, hydrogen and oxygen, but often coal contains quite a lot of sulfur. It contains nitrogen, volatile organic compounds. Sulfur, when it's burnt, turns into sulfur dioxide, nitrogen into oxides of nitrogen, and those also have respiratory impacts. I've put down silica, which sounds, I always thought silica was quite inert, but it's actually quite a significant respiratory irritant. And silica in coal dust is the higher the silica content, actually the higher quality the coal is in terms of the amount of energy it produces when it's burnt, but also it has a higher impact on people's lungs. So coal mine workers who are working with that high rank coal subject to more lung disease. So when coal is burnt, it releases a whole range of particulate matter. And that particulate matter, tiny particles, sometimes invisible to the human eye, but we can breathe them in. We breathe them into our throats, and depending on the size of them, they can go into our lungs, and in fact down deep into the alveoli of the lungs, which have less protective mechanisms. So things deposit in our upper airway. Depending on how far you are through your medical degree, you'll probably know that we've got mucus and cilia which protect us from particles that come into our upper airway. But when you get down into the alveolar region, there are very limited mechanisms that the lung has to remove those particles. So particles that are either fine, which is 2.5 microns or less, or ultrafine, can be inhaled into the alveolar regions, and about 60% of them will remain there and cause irritation and damage over the time. They can't be removed. Ultrafine particles, which are mainly released from diesel combustion, when you look at fossil fuel combustion, they're actually believed to pass directly into the bloodstream and then worsen inflammation, and therefore can actually cause damage to all organ systems. So we know that damage from coal combustion products can actually affect all systems of the body, from our hearts, our lungs, our endocrine system and beyond. I might just go back to this one. So you can see there that the size of the particles is really, that we're talking about, is really small. The particulate matters, the PM10s, smaller than smaller than 10 microns. You can see how many of those fit onto a human hair, and then the pink ones there the PM2.5, so really small. And the respirable particles are the fine and the ultrafine, and they can be breathed down deeply into our alveoli. This slide shows some of the current Australian standards that apply to, that are really there to, ideally to protect people against air pollution, but unfortunately are not actually applied specifically around coal mines, coal-fired power stations and other point sources of pollution. You'd think that if you had regulations to protect people's health, they should be enforced, particularly around the places that problem's likely to exist. But unfortunately, the regulations we have in Australia at the moment are based on a general overall population risk, and they don't seek to protect the people who live closest to those facilities. So I won't go through the detail of what the standards are at the moment, except to say that for those, both the total suspended particulates, which is a count of how many particles there are altogether, and for the PM10s, the coarse particles that only kind of make their way to our upper airway, there are enforceable standards in Australia. But for the PM2.5s, which get all the way down into our lungs and are really damaging, there's actually not any enforceable standard in Australia at the moment, which is a pretty huge oversight. In terms of the concerns about human health, here's some examples of what the known impacts of particulate matter of size 10 or less are. Increased asthma and respiratory disease, cancer, premature deaths, and for example, there's a 0.5 to 1.5% increase in daily death rates when particulate PM10s increase by 10 micrograms per metre cubed. And there are particularly vulnerable groups: the elderly, children, people with chronic lung disease, influenza and asthma. And if you think about how disease clusters in terms of socioeconomic situations, for example, people who are more likely to be smokers might well be people who are poorer and living, potentially living in those areas around coal-fired power stations. So the Latrobe Valley in Victoria, really highly disadvantaged population in parts, particularly, won't go into the reasons for that, but those people have higher rates of smoking, and then they're exposed to coal-fired pollution from coal-fired power stations. So it's really, I think, it's a social justice issue as well as a medical issue. PM2.5s are also associated with increased rates of lung cancer, hospitalisation for heart attacks, heart arrhythmias and heart failure, premature deaths, and have similar vulnerable groups. And this is an example of some research which was done in Melbourne. This looked at admissions to St Vincent's Hospital when PM2.5s were higher. So when there was a 10 microgram per metre cubed increase in PM2.5s above average. And you can see there's a significant increase in presentations to hospitals. So people might think, well, air pollution is an issue if it's a long-term exposure. But actually, there are immediate impacts of being exposed to air pollution. So ischemic heart disease increased by about 0.44%, heart rhythm abnormalities and heart failure up 1.28% on days when there'd been higher particulate pollution. Because these are really small risks, but they're apparent over when you look at the population, you obviously need to do epidemiological studies over time. So a study in the US of 500,000 people found that a 10 microgram per metre cubed increase in fine particulate matter was associated in an 8% increase in lung cancer mortality. And on the other hand, there's actually some really positive studies that show if you reduce air pollution, that there's a positive health effect. So when there was a 10 microgram per metre cubed drop in fine particulate pollution, life expectancy increased by 6.1 years. I mentioned that Australia doesn't have an enforceable standard for those PM2.5s. In the US, they're actually considering dropping their enforceable standard from 15 to 12 micrograms per metre cubed because it's really starting to stack up how significant the health impacts are. And they are estimating that they'll save between $2.3 and $5.9 billion in health costs from implementing that policy after the costs of implementing the policy. So it's really significant. Because of time, I'll just have to see how I'm going. Children are one of those particularly vulnerable groups to air pollution. And I really like these two images because I think they illustrate to us why we have such a responsibility as medical professionals and aspiring medical professionals to be particularly aware of the impacts on children, because children cannot choose where they live, and they cannot take steps to protect themselves from air pollution, and they also can't take steps to protect themselves against climate change, so they rely on us to speak up for them. This review from the World Health Organization in 2005 is about the effects of air pollution on children's health and development. It's about 200 pages long, and I once counted up the number of references in there. It was about 500 to 600 studies referenced to talk about the health impacts of air pollution on children's health. So there's really a very substantial body of evidence around this. This is my chance to put in some slides of cute children, so please excuse me. There's some reasons that kids are more vulnerable to air pollution. One of them is that their body systems are still developing. So, for example, children's lungs continue to develop after birth. And one of the amazing statistics around air pollution is that kids who grow up in areas of high air pollution have, on average, a 20% decrement in their in some measures of their lung function by the time they reach 18. So that's a really significant impact to take into adulthood. Their livers, their immune system, other body systems are not fully functional at this or once when they're born, so that renders them more susceptible. And kids behave differently to adults as well. I particularly love that picture on the left of the kids mucking around. But kids are more likely to be running around outside. They are more likely to put dirt and things that have got coal dust or other contaminants settled on them into their mouths. They consume more air, water and food than adults for their size. And also there's quite strong evidence that air pollution has synergistic effects with the impacts of viruses and lung infections, so that actually being exposed to both is worse than being exposed to one alone. Some proven effects I mentioned about the drop of 20% in lung function, aggravation of asthma, increase of cough and bronchitis, and exposure to particulate pollutions linked to sudden infant death syndrome and other early respiratory deaths. There are also increasing evidence around exposure to air pollution causing low birth weight and also allergic sensitization. And there's actually an increase of incidence of asthma when you live near traffic. I mentioned that, there are enforceable limits for those PM10s, but not for the PM2.5s. There's only advisory limits for those. There's also a whole range of other pollutants that are around coal handling facilities, and one that I didn't mention earlier was mercury. In Victoria, burning coal is the single greatest source of mercury release. Once the coal's burnt, the mercury gets into the atmosphere, then gets into our waterways when it rains, and then bioaccumulates in fish. And that's one of the reasons that there's actually limits on how much fish people are recommended to consume during pregnancy, because of the mercury levels. Mercury impacts on unborn fetuses and can impact on brain development. Another specific pollutant is lead, and IQ scores decrease by 1 to 3 points when blood lead levels double. Lead is also released from combustion of coal. And then there are a whole range of studies that look at the health impacts on mining communities, which can be quite significant. Increases in cardiopulmonary disease, lung disease, hypertension and kidney disease in communities living around coal mines, and unsurprisingly increases in incidence of lung cancer. On the other hand, a couple of examples that are really positive about what happens to health when air pollution is decreased. So in the Atlanta Olympic Games, there's a real effort made to reduce pollution from transport, increasing people's use of public transport, and ozone levels fell by a third. Asthma presentations fell significantly in that time, but returned to pre-games levels once there was a return of use of cars. In 1990, coal sales were banned in Dublin and the average annual particulate pollution fell by 36%. There was a 10% fall in cardiovascular deaths and a 15% fall in respiratory deaths. I was going to move on and talk about a little bit about the other main area that I kind of go out to communities and talk about, which is around coal seam gas and other unconventional gas mining. How many people here have heard about the issues with coal seam gas mining in Australia? Okay, and hydraulic fracturing or fracking, has anyone heard of that? Yeah, a few people, okay. Unconventional gas is basically methane that is trapped in coal seams or in sand or rock that surrounds coal. And there's an increasing push to actually develop an industry here in Victoria, as there has been for many years in the United States, but also more recently in Queensland and New South Wales, to extract that gas and burn it for energy use. One of the arguments has been that that's lower CO2 emissions than coal, but there are more and more studies out showing that leakage from these gas fields of methane really wipes out any CO2 benefit or any reduction in greenhouse gas benefit. And in order to actually get that gas out, there has to be, basically the rock or the coal seam has to be broken up. And that requires drilling down into the coal seam or into the gas, shale gas, or the shale seam, and injecting water, sand and chemicals at really high pressure to break up the coal seam or break up the rock to release the gas. Unfortunately, in doing that, a lot of the chemicals that are used are actually highly toxic. So, for example, some things that have been used have been benzene, toluene, ethylene and xylene, a whole range of chemicals. And those can find their way into underground aquifers and into groundwater and then contaminate both human drinking water but also farmland surrounding. So Doctors for the Environment Australia has been doing a lot of work, both making submissions to Senate inquiries but also going out and talking to communities about the potential health impacts of this process so that people can get informed before they're subject to those concerns. I'm not going to go into that in more detail, but this would be a really interesting subject for another evening actually, to talk about both about coal seam gas but also the community movements that are rising up around Australia and having a huge impact in saying that people don't want this kind of development going on in their areas. I'm going to finish up by talking about what Doctors for the Environment recommends in terms of what could be done to protect human health from the impacts of coal and air pollution. We think that we should update our national air quality standards in keeping with current scientific and medical evidence. That was supposed to happen, I think, in about 2008 or 9. We were due for an updated set of air quality standards, but they haven't been done yet. The process is happening at the moment, and Doctors for the Environment has been really active in actually lobbying for increased standards that will protect human health. We hope that will be coming out soon. At the moment, we don't have adequate national reporting of air quality levels. We think there needs to be a compliance standard for those PM2.5s that I mentioned, and also that populations that are at risk should be monitored, not just the background level. We really need to think about how we protect the most sensitive and vulnerable people in our community, not just look at general background risk. And one of the best ways to do that is to move to renewable energy, which has huge benefits both from the perspective of local health impacts of fossil fuel combustion, but also in terms of climate change. It also has great economic benefits as we make the transition to develop the skills and the know-how to do that in Australia and to have the jobs here. We think that we should remove subsidies for coal mines and exports. It's about $10 billion of subsidies to coal mining, fossil fuel mining in Australia. About 1 billion of them have just been cut over the last 6 months, but that leaves about $9 billion of subsidies going to fossil fuel industries. And we think that there should be independent health impact assessments of all new fossil fuel developments. I have to say, if I was sitting in your place, I would expect that that was the case. I would expect that every single new development would have a health impact assessment, but at the moment it doesn't, so that's one of the things we're pushing really strongly for. And we think that a really huge co-benefit for health would, to improve human health globally and nationally, would be to reduce the mining and use of coal for power generation. And this is a picture that came from that recent Greenpoint Peace report that I mentioned. 69-year-old coal worker in the emergency department in Jahara in India, suffering from pneumoconiosis after having been a coal worker for 40 years. A lot of that is pretty full on, so I thought I would end with something that you can do. Doctors for the Environment would really love you to join with us and to work on these issues in Australia and internationally. Hopefully later on you'll hear a bit about the idea of divestment, which means moving your money that's in banks and superannuation out of fossil fuel projects. And I believe that some really great work happening on campuses with medical students with that. And you know, if you're thinking, what can I do as I leave here? Make sure that your home is running on 100% green energy or renewable energy, because if it's not, then the electricity you use is causing this kind of air pollution, which is having impacts on people's health. And as a final thing, I thought I would put up this flyer. Some of the groups that I work with who are campaigning against coal seam gas are holding a rally this coming Sunday in the city. And there'll be some really great speakers, and it's a chance to hear from farmers in Gippsland who are concerned about the potential contamination caused by coal seam gas mining on their land and on their livelihoods. They'll be coming to Melbourne, and they're inviting people to come and join with them to express their concern about this particular type of fossil fuel mining and use. A final slide of one of the most beautiful places I've been in the world. I had the great fortune to go to Antarctica as a doctor. I was working with Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, and this just really reminded me of why it is that we need to fight to protect the natural environment as well as to protect human health, because it's one of the few last untouched places on Earth, and it's absolutely incredible to go into these environments and see what the world is like in places that haven't been degraded and destroyed. So yeah, it was a really amazing experience. Thanks very much for listening, everyone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Redenbach, for that speech. I think it was really important to note that there are such positive health outcomes, and in a relatively short period of time that we've seen with the reduction in air pollution. So could everyone please join me in thanking Dr. Redenbach again?
So now we'd like to introduce our panel. So we could get our panel speakers up. And so from your right to your left, you've got Harry Jennings, who's the Victorian representative of the DEA. And here you have Rachel Purcell. She's done some research before in the impact in climate change and rural health, and how prepared rural doctors feel to deal with the impact of climate change and some adaptation strategies. And here you have Tim Martin, who's heavily involved in the divestment campaigns that Dr. Redenbach was talking about. So he'll be able to tell you more about that. So, okay. So first, we've got a few questions, and then we'll open questions up to you guys. Okay. So to begin with, we have a question for Rachel. So Rachel, how will climate change affect the health of rural populations specifically, and what makes them most vulnerable?
Hi, so thank you for having me here tonight. As Claire said, my Bachelor of Medical Science looked at rural health and how to prepare rural general practitioners for climate change and extreme weather, and also what they thought about climate change. And so I think when you think about, why a rural population is vulnerable, you've got to kind of think a bit about, what the adaptive capacity of the community is, and also the potential impacts. So thinking about the exposure and then the sensitivity. And if you think about some of the problems that rural communities have already in terms of health, so we know that they have barriers to accessing healthcare. We know that they have poor health outcomes in comparison to metropolitan Australians. And we also know that despite having these poor health outcomes, that there are less presentations to health services from people in rural communities than there are from people in the city. So you have these kind of factors which then influence how the community can adapt when the climate impacts on their health and also impacts on their livelihood. And so, there's a lot of agricultural industry in rural communities, and when these break down because of drought or because of floods or fire or whatever else happens, they have kind of follow-on socioeconomic impacts. And I suppose when you think about, what that means for a community, and you think about, well, how can they fix it? And in particular, you think about the health impacts and how the health service can fix things. There are less doctors, less infrastructure, hospitals are less well equipped, and all of those factors kind of come in together to play a part.
Okay, thank you for that, Rachel. So we might ask Tim a question now. So, do you want to tell us a bit more about the divestment campaign and tell us a bit about how people can get involved?
Sure. I had like a big speech written, so I'm not sure if you want me to go through that. But, so the concept of divestment is a relatively simple one, and it's basically, as Merrin said, an organisation removing its investments from a particular organisation or industry, and in our case, we're focusing on the fossil fuel industry. This movement started in the US by a guy called Bill McKibben, who realised that we were losing the fight against climate change and losing it pretty badly. And he thought about why this was happening, and he realised that there was basically a lack of political will. And the reason for that is a lot of politicians, especially in the US, are funded or get donations from the fossil fuel industry. So he realised to have any chance of avoiding catastrophic climate change, what we really needed to do was reframe the issue to make the fossil fuel industry the bad guys. And that's what the divestment campaign is about. In our case, there are two main prongs to the divestment campaign. Of course, there's a sound economic principle, which is that of the carbon bubble and the fact that if you take away investments from a particular industry, then you're going to hurt them financially. But then there's the other aspect, which is the broader message that sends to the community, which is that you're removing the social license of the fossil fuel industry. Monash University has around $350 million in managed funds, which is basically where they invest their money. And Melbourne Uni has around $1.1 billion. So, don't be too jealous. But basically, those figures sound pretty big. But in the larger scheme of things, when you're talking about the fossil fuel industry, they're actually quite small. And if we succeeded in getting Monash or Melbourne to divest, that would be great, but the financial impact wouldn't be that great. It's more about the message that sends to the fossil fuel industry and to the wider community, which is basically, we don't believe what you're saying. You're morally bankrupt, and you don't listen to what you're saying. Sort of like the tobacco industry. To explain a bit more about the carbon bubble and the economics behind divestments, there's sort of three figures you need to know, and there's a lot of information out there, and you can sort of watch movies and short movies and articles and whatnot. But basically, more or less every government on the world has agreed that in order to avoid catastrophic climate change, we need to limit warming to 2 degrees Celsius. And some scientists worked out that in order to do this, there's a limit to the amount of carbon we can release into the atmosphere. And that limit is 565 gigatons. However, the issue with that is the fossil fuel industry owns around 2,800 gigatons of carbon in all their sort of oil and gas and coal reserves. And those reserves are valued at around $28 trillion, which is an absolutely massive amount of money. Now, the concept of the carbon bubble comes from the fact that as we go into the future and the effects of climate change continue to intensify, people are going to realize that we can't burn that 28,000 gigatons, or 2,800 rather, gigatons, that there's a limit. And 80% of that carbon can't be burnt, which is worth around $22 trillion. And when organisations like Monash and Melbourne start to realise that, and the share prices of these organisations essentially plummet, you end up in a situation like the GFC, which was where the housing and the credit bubbles basically burst. So that's kind of the economics of the carbon bubble. If you don't think this affects any of you, you'd probably be wrong, because we're all accidentally investing in the fossil fuel industry. If you have ever worked in a super, if you have money in any major or semi-major bank in Australia, then your super grows and you get interest from the banks by the fact that those organisations are investing in a variety of organisations and industries, and some of those industries will be the fossil fuel industry. So basically everyone here is profiting from the fossil fuel industry, and that's kind of bad. But that's why we're here, to do something about it. And right now in Australia, we've got lots of people working on churches, banks, universities, super funds, to try and get them to divest. So there are campaigns already happening at Monash and Melbourne, and one on the Melbourne City Council. So if anyone's got any ideas, if they want to get involved, then just, come up and speak to me later.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. And so a question for Harry now. Harry, how did you get involved with the DEA? And also, after you've answered that, maybe you can talk a little bit about the role of leadership in climate change.
Thanks, Claire. Well, I only joined DEA this year myself, and then back in January, and then there's a conference coming up in April in Adelaide, and I'd already been to Adelaide in January for the Fringe Festival, and I was like, I don't know if I want to go to Adelaide twice in 1 year. Ended up going, and it was the most amazing conference I've ever been to. And then they were like, hey, we need a Victorian student representative. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'll give it a go, and then all this follows, right? So it's really easy to get involved, and it's really awesome and really rewarding, if anyone's interested. And I guess I've cared about climate change for a long time, but not being sure where to start and what to do about it. And then this has really opened up so many doors and met so many cool people who have shown me heaps of ways to get involved and do something really useful and productive. And which I guess brings me to leadership. The thing, I reckon climate change is a global problem, right? And we need a global solution. And in Australia, our society is still addicted to these old habits of energy consumption and production that are hazardous and outmoded that Maren spoke to us about. And we have these old industries telling us that their way is the only way of doing things, and in fact it's not. So if we want to see big change that will have significant health impacts for worldwide, being the greatest global health threat of the 21st century, then we need to get a whole lot of people on board and asking for change. And in order to achieve that, I kind of had two ideas I want to share with you. The first one was leadership. Does anyone want to give me a definition of what leadership is? Being a leader? Yeah. When I talk about leadership, I mean being prepared to step a little bit outside your comfort zone to show other people what you care about. And when you do that, people watch you and they say, wow, this issue is so important to this person. Maybe it's a really important issue. Maybe I should learn a bit more about it. Maybe I should do something about it as well. So, for example, you can later on this week, when someone asks you, how was your week, what did you do, And you can say, oh, on Tuesday I went to this awesome evening, saw heaps of cool people talk about climate change and health. I didn't realise it was such a big issue. You should totally come along to the next event. You can jump on Facebook, and if you want to participate in the divestment campaign that Tim was talking about, email your bank, which is, we've got a link for that. Anyway, you can ask Tim, but saying that you're going to move your money to another bank unless they stop investing in fossil fuels. And you can write a post saying, hey everyone, I care about climate change and health. That's why I've taken this action with my bank. And you can present to a whole room of medical students or doctors or whatever and say, hey guys, did you know climate change is the greatest global health threat of the 21st century? And by the way, why are we throwing out tons and tons of plastic each year from this hospital? Have you heard about DEA's Greener Hospital Initiative? Like, there's heaps of ways that you can step a little bit outside your comfort zone to do something. And when you do that, not only do you show other people that this is really important and inspire them to get involved, but you also expand your comfort zone. And you learn more skills and grow a bit more confident and become more powerful as an individual as well. And then, if I can quickly mention organising, I won't spend too much time talking about organising because DEA is doing a whole workshop on it on the 1st of August on Sunday that we'd love you to come along to. But basically, the power you have as an individual is multiplied exponentially when you work in a team or a group. So I encourage you to get out there and find a group, DA, or any other group that is involved in this area. So Climate and Health Alliance, 350.org, AYCC, Quick Coal, all kinds of groups, right? And if you meet those people and speak to them, they will very quickly show you ways that you can make a significant difference. So yeah, I encourage you to be leaders and be organised. And just personally, I guess, I feel that if you're able to wake up in the morning and know that you are doing the best you can to help the cause that you care about, I don't think there's anything more satisfying to get out of life. So go for it. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Harry. So now we're going to open questions up to the floor. So just stick your hand up if you have a question that you'd like to ask any member of the panel or all members. Okay.
I'll just talk.
Thank you.
The divestment thing, where are you encouraged, or I suppose what you said, I tried to get back and say I'm going to move my money to this other bank. Where does the money go? Where are the good institutions to invest money in? Who are the people who are failing to support fossil fuels?
Well, I mean, there's a huge number of industries out there who you can invest your money in, and any investment portfolio will have a number of investments in a number of industries. So I guess from the divestment campaign point of view, we're just focusing on fossil fuel industries, which is, I mean, I don't know, every organisation is going to be different, but it's not like 50% of their investments are going to be in the fossil fuel industry. It's more like 5 or 10%. So it's just more about moving them to whatever else you invest in. Or what we're actually trying to do is, once we've gotten organisations to divest, we're trying to get them to invest in the renewable industry, and I guess that's the next step.
Does the Asset Owners Disclosure Project have that information?
Kind of, yeah. So were you asking which bank?
Yeah, I mean that would be, so in terms of where I'm keeping my money,
yeah,
the money that's going and being used, so by the fossil fuel industry, profits coming back, where would the money go?
Well, I guess there's no perfect organisations out there at this point in time. So it's more about the message of you sort of writing to your bank and saying, I'm not going to stay with you unless you change your behaviour and stop investing. There's a website called Market Forces, which looks at banks and where you can send that letter from. But it also has a list of more ethical banks. And there are a few, but they're generally smaller ones. I don't know any off the top of my head.
Okay, there was a question up the back. Oh, okay, sure. Any more questions? We might move on then. We have an activity, and we'll keep our panel sitting here if that's okay, because in the activity you might come up with some questions. So, if everyone can pair up with the person next to them and pick someone to be person A and someone to be person B. Alright.
Okay, so we picked our person A and person B.
Okay. Alright guys, quiet now. Thank you. Alright, so whoever's person A, your job is to answer person B's questions, and you can add in your own questions as well, and take note of what you feel difficult, because we'll talk about it later. And so person B, this is your role. You're a climate change skeptic. And you're going to ask person A the following questions, and person A can see how many they feel like they can answer. And if they want some expert answers from the panel later on, then they can ask those questions. So we'll give you about 5 or 10 minutes. And go ahead.
Statistic of like how many people in Australia believe that climate change is real and how many believe it's man. So can I throw that to the room again? I think it's interesting that people always underestimate the proportion of climate. People always overestimate the skepticism. Yeah.
still doing it, but I don't know about maybe bitch to
How can you tell when I don't know?
they like have silences and they both nod and go right.
It's like Tuesday climate change, 2012. So I just thought we could provide like this statistic. Most people know climate change. Admittedly, half of those people don't know or don't think it's like man-made. Are you worried about climate change? Most people say yes. And then one of the phrases is who do you trust to tell you the truth about climate change? Doctors is up there. Top 5.
So, do you want to put some slide?
Yeah, if I can just check the yeah.
Okay. We're going to finish So we were just asking if they had any problems, and then after that,
Yeah, and then I'll come back to it. Just ask some cool statistics.
well, we're running out of
The question.
So when you're ready, do you want to bring back everyone's attention and you can start up? Alright guys, you can stop the conversation now. Thank you. Alright, so now if you guys found any of those questions particularly hard to answer, put your hands up and the panel can have a go at answering them. Yeah?
How do I get by without
With renewables, that's the short answer. Have you guys heard, hands up, you've heard of Beyond Zero Emissions? Yeah, lovely. So Beyond Zero Emissions is a volunteer, largely volunteer organisation that is a group of scientists, engineers, and other professionals who've got together in. How old is it?
So Beyond Zero Emissions probably started back about 2008 or 9. In 2010, they published a report called the Zero Carbon Australia Stationary Energy Report, and it was basically a template of how Australia could move to 100% renewable energy in 10 years if we employ the resources to do so. And it will cost about 3% of GDP to do it in 10 years, but that's for an energy system that will last for decades. And it's about the same if you work it out per year. It's about the amount that we spend annually on insurance. If we spent that much money on rolling out renewable energy that exists now, solar panels, wind farms, and large-scale solar thermal power stations, we could actually power Australia with 100% renewable energy in 10 years. So that was their first report. We've got another, we've released another one on how we have zero carbon buildings. They've got another print coming out later this year as well. But yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions that were difficult? In that case, we might get Harry to talk about a bit about the role of climate skeptics.
Yeah, I just had 3 statistics that I thought I'd share with you guys because I thought they were interesting. Because we've had this practice conversation, imagine you're talking to a skeptic. But, yeah, this... Hands up... Okay, hang on. How do I do this? What percentage of people in Australia do you think agree that climate change is real? 25% is real, 90% is real. I'll give you clues in between those two. Yeah, that's close. So this, the CSIRO put out, they have been doing these annual surveys, 2010, 2011, 2012, assessing Australia's attitudes to climate change. And it's a really interesting report, so I won't go through the whole thing. But, good. About 80% of Australians believe that climate change is real. So, and this is, like, people, not only that, the report also found that Australians consistently underestimate other people's estimates of who believes climate change is real, and people always overestimate the number of skeptics out there. Admittedly, about half of those people think that climate change is not anthropogenic or caused by human activity, but those people could do with a lot more information, and that's kind of the debate you're having, is not whether climate change is happening, but how is it happening and what we're going to do about it. This is a complex and confusing issue, but you're the guys who can provide the messages to the people who don't have the information yet. More importantly, perhaps, there's a graph down here. Yeah, as I was saying. Any guess as to what percentage of people are worried about climate change in Australia? 20%? 40? I'll show you. Most people are somewhat worried, very worried, or maybe a little bit not very worried about climate change, okay? But more than half are in the latter two categories. So this conversation of like whether climate change is happening and whether we need to do something about it and is it real and all that, you're going to have a lot of different conversations. But the conversation of is it real is not the conversation that you're going to be having most often at all. Most often you'll be having the conversation of what are we going to do about it, because this is a serious issue. I'm going to do something, but I don't understand. Everyone talks about carbon taxes and emission trading schemes, and I don't get it, and what's going on, right? But your job as educators. And I'll show you one more statistic one more result that I thought was really cool. The question is, who do you trust to give you straight information about climate change? And guess who's number 5? Above government scientists, industry scientists, local authorities, government, car and oil companies are pretty low down the bottom. But health professionals play a big role in telling people factual information that is relevant to their health and their future. So we should include this as the service that we deliver to the public. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. Okay. So now Tim's going to come up and speak a bit about the importance of voting.
I think this should work, shouldn't it? Or not? Alright, so I've been given the interesting task of talking about voting to a bunch of people who probably knows more about voting than I do, but we'll give it the best shot I can. Sorry to anyone who does know everything I'm about to say, but judging from the faces here, there's probably a lot of people who haven't voted as yet, and there's a lot of misconceptions out there as to how the voting system works. So I'll try and cover some of that stuff. And it will try and be fairly non-partisan. I'm not going to try and tell you who to vote for, but rather how to vote. So, some basic stuff. The Parliament of Australia is made up of two main bodies, the House of Reps and the Senate. And both those organisations are very important in the, passing of law and legislation. The House of Reps has around 150, well, it does have 150 seats, and those are elected by an electorate, which represents around 95,000 people. So seats in the House of Representatives, they're elected based on population. Therefore, the bigger states have a larger number of seats. Victoria has 37, and New South Wales has 48, Queensland has 30. In comparison, the Senate has 76 seats, and the Senate structure is based on equal representation between all the different states. So every state has 12 senators, and the funny thing about it is only half of the senators are elected per election, so every 3 years, which means that this upcoming election, we have 6 senators to elect. And those senators, rather than being elected by an electorate of people, they're elected by the whole state. So every single person in the state elects the 6 senators. Now, the reason why the Senate is so important is because, as I said before, all legislation has to go through both the House of Representatives and the Senate. And in Australia, whoever controls the government, which is basically the House of Representatives, doesn't usually have the balance of power in the Senate. So the Senate acts as like a check or a review for all legislation, which is why it's so important. So on to the voting now. I'm going to talk about the House of Representatives and the Senate separately because they're slightly different. With the House of Representatives, it's known as preferential voting, which means that it's not about the person who gets the highest primary vote, it's about the preferencing system. And to be elected, you have to get more than 50% of the total vote. Well, not the total vote, but the vote after preferences. And how this works, and we'll go through an example in a sec, but basically, if no one gets more than 50% of the votes in the first round of preferences, then the candidate with the lowest number of votes gets eliminated. But the people who voted for that person, their vote doesn't disappear suddenly. The full count of their vote, 100% of it, just goes to their second preference. So what's really important about that is your vote doesn't disappear if you vote for a minor party. It's still there, it just goes to your second preference. So this is an example of taken off the Australian Parliamentary website, and you can see there are 3 candidates, A, B, and C. Candidate A got 45% of the vote, candidate of the primary vote, candidate B got 30% of the primary vote, and candidate C got 25%. In a system where the person who gets the highest number of votes in the primary vote, candidate A would get elected. But that's not how Australia works, because you have to get to that 50%. So what happens is the candidate with the lowest number of votes, candidate C, gets eliminated from the race, and the people who voted for candidate C, their votes then go to their second preference. So down here, it says that these are the second preference votes, and 4% of the 25, well, including the 25, voted for candidate A in their second preference, and 21% had candidate B as their second preference. And those get just added on to the original vote. And the outcome here is that candidate A got then 49% and candidate B got 51%, which means candidate B got over that 50% and therefore was elected, which is completely different to what would happen if it was just the person with the most number of votes originally. So the important thing to take out of that is that your vote isn't useless if you're voting for a minor party. It doesn't get eliminated when that candidate gets eliminated. It just gets transferred completely to your second or third or fourth preference, depending on how many preferences they need to go through. Other interesting things are you have to rank all candidates on the House of Representatives sheet. If you only sort of rank 1, 2, and 3 out of the 6, then your vote is counted as incorrect and it won't be counted, which is obviously pretty bad. And if you're worried about that, there's this site here, which is, I doubt anyone's going to go to, but you can sort of practice voting and like you can fill out like stuff, and then it tells you if you failed, basically. All right. So the Senate is a bit more confusing, and I won't go into all the details, but as I mentioned before, the whole state votes for every one of the 6 senators. So in that way, it represents something which is called proportional representation, which says its composition closely reflects the voting pattern of electors. if you think about it, if there was a minor party which consistently polled at 25% over the whole of the country in every single electorate, they would never get a seat in the House of Reps because they haven't reached that 50%. But 25% of the country is saying, we want this, this party to be governing us. And that's where the Senate comes in, because the Senate looks at the overall state, and rather than having to reach that 50%, you only have to reach 1/6, or it's actually 1/7, but that's not the point, 1/6 of the overall state's vote. So 25% means that you get one, and depending on how much higher it was, or maybe 2 senators. So it's a lot easier for minor parties and independents to get elected into the Senate. So to win a state in the Senate, a seat in the Senate, you need to get around, you or your party needs to get around 15% of the vote, and that's not the primary vote, that's after preferences as well. So as you can see, the Senate's really important for firstly providing a check to the House of Representatives, but also getting other people other than the major parties controlling some of the legislation that goes through. With the actual voting, there's 2 methods, above the line and below the line. And this is an example of a Senate ballot sheet. The reason the above the line or below the line was brought in is because the Senate is, their senators are going for basically, well, it's the whole state. There's often a huge number of senators, like 50 or 60, sometimes even 80. And so rather than having to go through and rank every single senator, which is what you have to do if you vote below the line, if you do the below the line system, you can just select, you can just vote above the line, and essentially all you do is pick the party that you agree with. So you just select one party, and you just put a 1 next to that party, and your preferences will be allocated by that party. So if you're really OCD, you can do this, but 95% of Australia votes above the line, just because it's so much easier. Yes, Ed?
Interesting fact, you can in fact vote below the line in Roman numerals if you so choose.
Sure. I didn't know that. Yet again, you can practice voting above the line or below the line here, so you just select 1 and success. All right, so just to finish off, a lot of people will often say to you, if you say you're going to vote for a minor party, a vote for a minor party is a wasted vote. When they say that, they're usually talking about the House of Representatives. And as I've just talked about, in the Senate, that doesn't really count because it's the whole state's vote. And the Senate is almost pretty much just as important as the House of Reps. And if we do talk about the House of Reps, then I've just covered preferential voting and how your vote isn't wasted if you vote for a minor party. It just goes to your second preference if that party is eliminated. The other thing to note is that first, voting for a party other than one of the minor parties sends a really strong message to the major parties that you don't agree with them. This is an example of 2 seats in the 2010 election. Kooyong, which is my seat and safe Liberal seat, and Melbourne, which is probably the biggest Green stronghold in the country. First of all, this is a really neat example of how why preferences are so important, because Adam Bandt only got 35% of the primary vote. But because the Liberals preferenced him ahead of Labor, 21%, this 21% of the vote, when it went to second round of preferences, actually went to Adam Bandt, bringing his vote up to over and above the 50%, therefore he was elected.
Is this based on their brochures that they give you?
This?
Yeah, because how can you follow those preferences in the House of Reps?
This is based on, this just came from an ABC sort of election. Anyway.
Basically, you can vote however you want, and the parties have this card that tell you how they would like you to vote. And most people follow those, which is why we got a result like this in Melbourne. But you can actually vote however you want, whatever you want, no matter what piece of paper someone gives you.
people, have a lifelong trust and affiliation with the party, they'll usually follow their how to vote card.
Adam?
Just where I wrote it. I don't know if you're going to cover this as well, but on the radio I heard the other day that the first preference that you put, regardless of whether it goes to second, third, or fourth preferences, is the party that will be allocated the funding from that election as well.
Yeah, I'll talk about that in a sec. But thanks for that. All right, so irrespective of what actually happened at the last election in terms of preferences, why I actually put this up here was to illustrate that if you were one of the major parties and elected to either of these seats, then if you were in Melbourne, then you would know that 35% of people voted for the Greens, and therefore you know that when you're representing that seat, you have to be a little bit more left-leaning, otherwise your electorate's not going to re-elect you at the next election. Compared to Kooyong, where there was comparatively a smaller Greens vote, and therefore the current Liberal Member of Parliament would sort of think, well, I don't have to keep those people as happy because I'm pretty safe where I am, and there's only 18.3% of people that I need to sort of, well, that are left. And it sends a pretty strong message. Like, it basically means whoever's in Melbourne has to act in a more left-leaning manner than other seats. What Adam was talking about is after the election, there's this sort of pool of money that gets distributed to all the candidates, providing that they got over 4% of the primary vote. And it turns out that that pool of money, when distributed amongst all voting members in Australia, is worth about $2.50. So if nothing I've said has made sense to you about why your vote isn't wasted, then at the very least, when you vote for a particular party, know that you're giving them $2.50. And therefore, you can feel really good if you don't like the major parties by taking away that $2.50 from them and giving it to someone else. And it all adds up. You can see, these numbers aren't huge. 21 million isn't huge, but it's significant enough to be making some sort of difference, especially to a minor party, which doesn't have huge amounts of donations coming in. Because I've tried to sort of be non-partisan, there's this site called EnviroTracker by Environment Victoria, and it basically, if you care about the environment and this is something that is going to influence your vote, you can go online and it sort of gives a breakdown of the policy of all the major parties with respect to the government, so with respect to the environment, so climate, renewable energy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a sort of neat summary. And
Could I mention another one that's just come out today?
Yep.
Which is on Facebook, and I think Harry might have shared actually.
Oh yeah, yeah.
There's a scorecard from the Climate and Health Alliance, which is a group that covers a whole lot of different health professions, people concerned about climate change, and they've got a scorecard based on parties' policies around climate change as well. And it's really cute. It's like a little ECG. It goes up when it's positive and down when it's negative. I was a bit worried about some of the heart rhythms on it, I have to say. Wow. I don't think you'd really want any of those rhythms yourself.
Yeah.
On a more, not just confined to climate change, the ABC's broad compass, I think a lot of people have already seen that, but has a more, sort of covers a whole lot of policy areas, not in as much detail perhaps as some insights, but it's a general overview as to where you might choose to vote, depending on your interests.
Based on what Harry was saying before, it was actually really interesting because I think climate change was the fourth biggest thing that people cared about in the upcoming election after the economy, refugees, and something else, and then it was climate change. So, fourth is reasonably high on the list. Yeah, well. And if you want more information, then there's the Australian Parliament website and the Australian Electoral Commission, which is where you can do the practice voting, which is lots of fun. So, yeah, that's it. it's spread out between the people who do. So there's like $50 million, and for all the people who get above that, it's distributed amongst them. So yeah, it's not like it disappears. It's spread out between the people who do get above 4%.
I have another question.
I have a question for Harry, actually. You say that, it's back, so there's the information there that 80% of Australians believe in climate change and believe there's a problem. So if that knowledge is already out there, wouldn't you say that the barriers out there are non-informational barriers? So like, what, and I suppose you talked about the diversity as something that can be done, but it kind of seems like, it's not like, I know that that's the whole point is you're promoting awareness about that, but that is kind of like at the moment it's still quite small scale, and something needs to be done, but it needs to be big. As we said, it's a global issue. It's a huge issue, and we have these big corporations investing and paying for the government kind of campaigns, and it really our choices. Well, we have choices, but really it's Liberal, Labor kind of thing that are always up there. What can we actually do? Do you have any bigger kind of is there anything bigger that we can do besides and I know there's a lot of small things that are up to the big things, but it feels like it's something that's quite a foreboding. In the next 10 years, it's going to be a big problem. How it's going to change.
Yep. Yeah, so in terms of what you can do, I think I mentioned earlier that I think the most efficient way to learn what you can do is to join and speak to some of the groups who are already doing stuff, and there's lots of different groups doing different things, and they're all doing really interesting things. So that's kind of working with other people, and individually, I think conversations are the cornerstone of changing people's attitudes and opinions about things. And I spoke about providing information because I think there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation put out by vested interests around climate change. But more important than information giving is values kind of exchange and showing someone that you really care about something. That kind of relates to us to American leadership. Does that answer your question specifically enough, or?
Yeah, sure.
Rachel, I will chip in a bit. Rachel, I will chip in.
I suppose from a health professional perspective, there is a lot that we can do. My research in particular looked at what general practitioner beliefs were about climate change, and is it anthropogenic? Does it exist? Will it affect human health? And the stat that I found from a group of rural GPs in New South Wales were below 80% believed in climate change at all. And we asked them a lot about, what do you believe about, the role of the GP as an advocate, both to your patient and then to your local community and to government. And a lot of them believed in their role as an advocate on general health issues, but when it came to climate change and extreme weather, the results plummeted, and particularly for older GPs, less than 50%. And I think, I find that really surprising. And my supervisor was like, Rachel, of course this is what people think, And I suppose it's, everyone, or maybe 90% of people in this room believe in climate change and the impact on health. And so I think there's kind of a generational shift in what health professionals believe, and that probably what the biggest thing you can do is to be a part of that and to be an advocate and to go and do things like, if you're interested in climate change, go and do a BMSI. And whilst that's a really small thing, you kind of impact on other areas in big ways, kind of that the droplet effect or ripple effect. And the response from some people are quite strange, and Harry was talking about having people be aware that you're interested in an issue and then make them think about it. When I'm on clinical placement and people ask me about what was your BMSI on, or why you're on conference leave, and I tell them what I did, they look at me like some of them look at me like I'm a bit weird, and then I talk about it, and it starts to click. So there's that's just the way you can influence people around you as well. And whilst they're all still small picture things, big picture things happen. And so next week I'm going to the Conference for the Environment and Health in Switzerland and talking about what rural GPs in Australia think. So it follows on, but it takes time.
I just feel like it's quite worrying that you've been talking about
I guess I didn't really get a chance to talk about some of the successes of divestment. And I know sometimes you feel a bit powerless, and I certainly feel that as well. But things, with respect to climate change, in the US, 16 councils, 9, including like San Francisco, Seattle, 9 religious organisations, and a bunch of universities have divested. On the world stage, big organisations like the World Bank and the European Investment Bank have just in the last couple of months come out and said they're no longer going to fund coal-fired power plants. Now that's really big, like, and that was done by a small group of people probably who were putting that forward. Like the World Bank isn't sort of a bunch of tree-loving hippies. They're a big organisation and generally well respected. The other thing is the divestment movement was first, sort of the big success story was with the South African apartheid, and it's sort of credited as the thing that got the ball rolling when a bunch of universities sort of said, look, we're not going to take this anymore, and they lobbied their university management to not invest in organisations that had any sort of dealings with the South African government. And that's how that broader movement started. So, I mean, divestment, you going to your bank and sort of saying, I don't want this, like that is a small motion, and lots of people doing that will make a big difference. But even like Monash divesting, as I said before, isn't going to make a huge dent in the fossil fuels sort of their workings. They're not going to be like, oh, Monash divested their sort of few $1 million from us, because they've got trillions and trillions of dollars. But it's about the message that it sends out to people and starting a broader movement. It might not work, it might work, but if we all sort of sit here and think it's never going to work, then we're not going to get anywhere.
Also, you never know when you're going to win until you win. There's the whole system of people taking action in different realms, at different levels, and with different firms and different people. Creates a system of forces that eventually will reach a tipping point and change everything. So, you know, it might be unexpected and it might be and the sooner the better.
Any more questions?
Okay, then would everyone please join me in thanking our panel yet again? So next up, we're just going to hear from Kate, who's from the DEA. Yeah.
Oh, that's all right. Hi guys, so public speaking is not my favourite thing, so if I go blank I might just have to read this out word for word. But so I'm Kate from DEA. Are you alright there, Ramos? We're all good. I first of all just wanted to say a quick answer to your question, Nikita. So I think we live in a democratic society, and I think the power of the people is underestimated. So we actually have a say what happens. That's how democracy is meant to work. And you can see the power of the people in Syria and, you know, apartheid, like all over the world. It's quite powerful, but the people have to be educated. They have to know the issues. And that's kind of where conversations come into place, which is what Harry said. So just even having conversations with people about this kind of thing it's actually tougher than it sounds, and it will make a big difference. First of all, I just wanted to say some thank yous. So first of all, thanks to you guys for coming. So it shows that we're doing our job, that it's working. So our job is to get you guys caring about the environment. So thanks for coming. And also thanks to Merrin for coming tonight. So you're insanely busy, and yeah, I don't know how you've done it. I think there's a Superwoman suit underneath your daily attire. But thank you very much. It's very appreciated. Who else? The panel. Okay, thanks guys for coming. I definitely wasn't putting my hand up to do it, so thank you. And I know you've come a fair way tonight to do this. So thanks to Claire and Raymar and Ravi as well from Ignite for helping to organise this. It's been just so easy. I haven't really had to do anything, so that's beautiful. Thanks for all your hard work. So I just want to say a couple of things. on a bit of a serious note, so everything that makes sense to us, everything that, you know, we do every day, what we study, the hobbies that we have, so all of this is man-made, it's been created, and this is not the way that it's always been. So before we came along, there was the Indigenous people, and they lived kind of with the land in a close relationship where it was give and take, and they really respected the land. They saw it as kind of a partnership, and they saw it as a god, and they also respected other species. So different tribes had different species that they weren't allowed to kind of hunt too much of, so that those species didn't go out into extinction. But the society that we live in is kind of built on this infinite growth, infinite greed, and from the environment we just take and take and take and take, and we just take this for granted. So yeah, we're starting to see the environment take it, and now it's starting to fight back. So it's throwing some punches with climate change. And I think that's where we have to realise that we need to get involved. So that brings me to DEA. So it is actually super fun to get involved in something so serious as climate change. You meet some really awesome people. I've met all of these guys on the panel, and it's really good to talk to people that think outside the square, or, you know, are happy to talk about issues outside of the square, and are happy to fight for the environment but enjoy it as well. Like, you know, a few weeks ago we all just went down to the beach and pretty much just ran around like kids, which was really fun. So there is lots of good things to get involved with. Yeah, and just a few things that I've been involved with is, so you can just run your own workshops, kind of push yourself to, if you hate public speaking, you might find that you're kind of, you know, building up on skills like that. And yeah, there's documentaries that are happening with different groups. So we were kind of helping out with one last year, Friends of the Environment. So there's heaps of different environment groups that are doing things and working together. So DA is certainly a way to kind of get involved in those groups. And something else we did last year was just getting a whole bunch of medical students signing a petition, and we brought it to the council in Sale, and we said, like, we want to put a ban on the coal seam gas mining because there's a plan for huge expansion of that. So that was definitely getting somewhere. And I'm going to hand over to Bridget, who's actually the DEA rep for Monash. But before that, I just want to say we have a conference on next year. So it's on the 22nd and 23rd of March. So that will be a really good opportunity to listen to some amazing doctors and just some amazing people. We had Bob Brown at the conference this year, so we're trying to beat the people in Adelaide and get someone better than that, but I'm not sure that we can beat that. And then you get to kind of network with each other, and yeah, so make sure you come to that. So I'll hand over now.
Yep, so as Kate said, I am very recently the DEA Monash representative, and I'm hoping to get a Monash group together and sort of start developing some projects within Monash towards some of these things that these guys have been talking about, including like divestment and advocacy, and perhaps improving the curriculum around global health and climate change in medicine. So anyway, basically all I really want to say is that we're going to have a very casual sort of get-together meeting so that I can meet anyone that's interested in being involved in DEA at Monash, and then go from there in terms of deciding what kind of projects we could get going and sort of start forming groups working towards those. So you can sign up with us outside right now, but you can also sign up online at dea.org, and it's $10 a year as students, so it's very cheap. And then there's several Facebook pages with DEA that you can, you know, like and be updated on information about DEA and everything. But if you're interested in being part of sort of like the Monash DEA group, I'm going to have a meeting in about 2 weeks' time on Wednesday the 28th of August at the Lucky Cock at 6 p.m. So if you're even like slightly interested, then come along and we can talk about what we want to do with Monash DEA. And I think that's about everything. We'll also be holding an event in AMS's Code Green Week, which is in September, which I can keep you informed about as well. It's likely to be on the Tuesday night, but there's also a Melbourne Uni event on the Thursday night, which we should all go to as well. Yeah, so I think that's everything. Come and speak to us if you're, even...
Make sure you sign up tonight.
Yeah, sign up for DEA because it's a really great organisation. And even if you're slightly interested in joining Monash DEA, then come along to the meeting because, it doesn't matter how much you're willing to put into it. You can still be part of it, and it's really a lot of fun. So, Harry?
We're also doing Skills and Strategy Day on the 1st of September.
Yes, there's also a Skills and Strategy Day on the 1st of September. So I think that's everything. And, thanks again for coming.
Thank you. All right. Kate, we'd also like to thank you for helping us with the evening. You say you feel like you haven't done a lot of work, but we feel the same way because of what you've done, so thank you. And now we'll have Tressa. Tressa is the Environmental Officer for Talk, and she's going to be talking a bit about the environmental impact of this evening.
Hi, so as Claire says, I'm the Sustainability Officer for Talk, which basically means my role is to help the event organisers of events like these and the ones for our other modules to come, to make them that bit better in terms of their environmental impact. So it's things like making sure that we get the Ignite Key Cups and use these events so we can cut down on the amount of waste we have from plastic cups, which, on a side note, we do intend to reuse, so don't take them home with you. Make sure if anyone has one on the person at the moment, like I do, to leave them on the table here or outside before you go home. And it's just considering the small things that we can do that make a difference. So we made quite an effort tonight to not use paper. We initially were going to have paper scenarios to hand out for scenarios written on paper for the activity we did, and we're like, little things like that are really, really easy to change. So I guess I just want to introduce myself now so that people know this is something that we really do want to apply these principles about what we can do for our environment. And we're doing it tonight, but we're not doing it just with our climate change and health module. We're going to be as active and as proactive as we can about making these small changes throughout all of our events. And on that note, I just have one question that I want to ask from you guys, and that's I'm interested in how people got here tonight, because travel is obviously one of the things that has a fairly big impact on sustainability. And I know a lot of you will have drove, and that's fine, but I just want kind of an idea. Who got here by walking or riding a bike? So. That's about a third of people, which is great. And can I also get you to put your hand up if you drove a car here? So only if you're the driver. If you're a carpooler, I kind of want to know about actual cars. Cool. That's just something. That's another thing we want to look at. We want to make it as easy as possible for people to get here by public transport or by methods like walking and taking or riding a bike, whatever it is. And the last thing I want to say, which I'm not sure if someone else is going to mention, is that everyone who came to this event is going to get emailed a short feedback survey to fill out. It has only got about 12 questions. It's not all about the environment. There's 2 questions on there that I contributed, but it's just about how the event ran, and as it's going to take you 3 or 4 minutes. We'd really appreciate it if you could fill out that survey and return the keep cups. Thank you.
All right, so this is just for the talk students. So you've done your first checkpoint, and now it's all about talking and interacting on the website, and there'll also be another activity to do, but that will be explained on the website. And we'd just like to thank you all for coming, and also thanks to our lovely panel, Dr. Redenbach, Kate, and the whole talk team. Thank you.